Welcome to Meeting Success, the podcast for the meetings, events, and entertainment industry. I'm Coach Pete Sackel, business and productivity coach and 30-year event production veteran. And I'm going back to my roots to reconnect with top leaders and entrepreneurs to uncover valuable insights on business and mindset. And no doubt, you'll hear some entertaining stories along the way from a colorful cast of characters.
Go out and make others feel important.
Every week, you will in fact be meeting success. Now, the stage is set, it's showtime. Hey everybody, welcome to the show. This is a special one today. I'm sitting here with Disney royalty. Bob and Rick Allen, the brothers Allen, are here with a combined 50 years at Disney. Is that right?
More than that.
More than that.
Oh gosh, yeah. And if we add them up, we're going to embarrass ourselves. But I had 43.
And I had 25.
43?
Yeah.
Wow, I guess I missed that on LinkedIn.
Yeah, well, I started when I was 3, and you.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. Plus, if you count the years that your dad was there before you guys were there.
That just counts the 43, the 60 plus just counts our generation.
Right.
Your second gen, so pretty much, 2 lifetimes.
Yeah, it's exciting to have you guys on here. Again, like I mentioned, your dad, Robert Allen, was a Disney icon for many years, Disney executive. It's interesting. I was actually looking that up. I didn't realize that your dad passed away in '87. Right. I started at Disney in 1990.
Okay.
And I feel like your dad was still there when I was there. I mean, just like the stories and the legacy they left behind, and then for you guys to follow in footsteps, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
Great to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited. Bob and I talked a little bit yesterday, and we started talking about like what we would discuss, and mentioned that Rick would love to join us. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was just like what you've been doing now since Disney. And maybe we can start with that, just to kind of give people an idea of who you are and what you do and what they can call you for.
Well, I can jump in, I guess, and set the stage a little bit there for me. So I left Disney quite a while ago. I left Disney in '01 and started a company called Ideas. We are a brand and experience design firm, based here in Orlando. We work in destination entertainment, but we also work in some other non-entertainment related verticals like healthcare and workforce development, economic development, things like that. It was funny. It was a great story. I mean, I unusually got to buy the division from Disney that I was running.
I was going to ask, but that's always been. I don't think I've ever asked you about that, but that's always been very interesting to me that you actually started Ideas inside of Disney, and then you left, and you were able to take that concept and create a private company.
Right. Disney Ideas started out as our post-production arm of our studio operation. And it was just a lucky confluence of things. Walt Disney World particularly at that time was, I won't call it retracting, but it was kind of reassessing, hey, what's our core? What should we really be doing? What have we maybe gone too far out on the plank on, know? And when you do look at that as an organization, primarily you look at service organizations, you don't look at profit centers, and look, Walt Disney World needs to be about the guest, right? And so it sort of got down to, in the mid-'90s, if you weren't food and beverage, merchandise, and attractions and lodging, it's kind of like, okay, but do we need to own that? And
right.
So it was great. I had a conversation with the guy who ran the company, a guy named Al Weiss, and said, look, he said, I think we need the things you guys do, but I'm not sure we need to own them. Would you ever consider wanting to buy that thing? I said, no. No, I'm a Disney guy. I didn't go to business school. I'm a writer and a guitar player. I don't know anything about that stuff, And of course, 3 years later, I bought the company. So it was a fun transition. But the real fun has been for 21 years now. We've been out as a small, nimble group.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been that long.
Yeah, I can't either. Of experienced designers, and so it's been great. So that's kind of where I've been. The next phase is about last April we sold Ideas to a wonderful young man out of Houston, Texas, and we're part of a consortium of companies now we call the Summit. We can talk about that a little bit, but for me, over the next 2 years, I'm kind of winding down my role with Ideas, and for the last decade, I've been kind of out in the world occasionally, giving a keynote talk here or there, and I'm really focused now on developing that side of what I do, and and there are all the things that go with that, things like podcasts, for instance, and books and stuff. So when I started thinking that, Rick can tell his story, but we kind of said there's probably some places where we can team up. So that's sort of where we ended up.
Yeah. So I would add on to that. I was the time I got to spend at Disney was, again, 43 years, and so most of it in resorts. I ended up at Future World as the general manager for Future World in Epcot.
You actually started though as a custodial
Host.
Yeah. Is that what I read?
In Fantasyland.
Wow.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, and which was really a great experience. 16 years old and got to have a good time. Probably the most notable hourly role was Jungle Cruise. I got to be a Jungle Cruise skipper.
Oh wow.
And
that's like a feather in the cap for a Disney cast member, isn't it? Like I hear like
we skippers think so.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that's where I heard it from. Yeah.
Yeah, and we used to have great battles with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It's not there anymore, but on who could get more people on their boats quicker. We always won. Jungle Cruise. So anyway, I got to have a lot of great hourly roles and got to move into resorts and got to open Euro Disney on their task force at Disneyland Paris. Got to open the Grand Floridian Resort. Got to be the general manager to open Art of Animation Resort, which was a tremendous bunch of fun. But I ended up at Future World right before I retired, and I tried to do the same thing, Bob, that you did, was buy my company, but I think it was valued at about $1.5 billion at the time. So I couldn't buy Future World.
Okay.
I didn't get that opportunity.
I think you only need like 10% down.
Right. So anyway, after I retired from there about 6 years ago, I started out in consulting, and I got to go work for Great Wolf Lodge. At many different lodges around the United States, and a lot of Disney people went there, and so it was really a neat. We all sort of spoke the same language, and Great Wolf was doing great things. They have a very interesting corporate culture, and so I'll never forget Erin Wallace, who also worked at Walt Disney World, and I got to work with. She went to be at Great Wolf Lodge, and she brought me in over there to do some temporary things, and she just said, "Look, let me tell you what Great Wolf is. It is, these are guests that are practicing to come to Walt Disney World. I mean, because it's I don't know if you know what Great Wolf is, but it's a 400-room resort, beautiful indoor water park, and it's all designed for little kids.
Really?
And so it was just a ball to go and stretch my mind a little bit and to say, hey, it's not, Disney's not everything. Look at this out here. And so it's an interesting way to spend some time. I got to work with Bob's company, Ideas, on some projects. I got to go to...
Still going on a couple.
And we are. Yeah, we've still got some things in the fire. I got to be the chief operating officer at Give Kids the World, which is in Kissimmee, a wonderful resort that helps provide and grant wishes for critically ill kids.
Yeah, it is a great organization. I saw that you were involved in a couple of different charities. I saw as well the Give Kids the World, and there was
Special Olympics.
Special Olympics, right?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was right after that. I got a chance to go work with the Special Olympics USA Games, which were held here in Orlando and Walt Disney World and around.
2022, I think, right?
2022 games. Yeah, and that was a ball. And
Shepherd's Hope as well.
Yes, thanks. Yep, and Shepherd's Hope. I joined their board. I'm the treasurer of their board now, and they have a tremendous story, which could take our whole podcast about. But they provide health care for people with no insurance.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's a huge need for that.
Yeah.
And so we have a great group of volunteers that help keep that thing going, and there's just miraculous stories. Anyway, we got a chance to do all that. Yeah. Now, joining in with Bob, we're trying to do, again, we sort of feel like we have this, we got a chance to learn about Disney and culture and leadership, sort of in a kitchen table sort of way.
Right.
We talked about that yesterday, where we got a chance to see things happen and percolate at Walt Disney World and the Disney Company from our back porch.
Yeah.
In a way. And
yeah, I mean, literally.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of decisions that manifested as a guest experience or a fundamental operating change or a strategy, happened on our screen porch.
Yeah.
And, our dad was pretty inclusive, and, he'd say, hey, you guys might as well sit in. You might be interested in this. And
how old were you guys, like, when he was there and kind of involved in a lot of the planning and everything, where you would have gotten influenced by that?
Well, I mean, in a way, our whole life. I mean, we moved down here this summer before Walt Disney World opened in 1971. and I was, I don't know, 17, 18 years old, something like that. So, but old enough that it was, it was in our mind.
Right.
And of course, one story I always tell is my origin story with Disney is, I left Florida, went to college at University of Colorado, and got my degrees. And the last thing in the world I was going to do is work for the company my dad worked for.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
I have a normal teenager thing.
Right.
And I've been working in radio.
Anything but.
Oh yeah. I've been working in radio, and I've been doing concert production, and it's like, I like entertainment, but I'm not going there.
Right.
I'm not going to cut my ponytail off and go there. Fast forward, all of a sudden there's this opportunity, and we were laughing about the story yesterday. It's a long Shaggy Dog story, but I ended up getting to interview with a marvelous guy named Bob Yanni, who ran entertainment in those days. Bob's a legend, and just I walked away going, wow, Disneyland has the two things I like. On one hand, they have stories and they have creative, and they have that. On the other hand, they got lights and knobs and stuff, and I like all that stuff. Yeah. It's like you don't get both of those if you stay working in rock and roll. So as it goes, the rest is history. But I started in September of 1976 with the company, it's interesting too. Rick had obviously a really, really varied career. I tell people all the time, back then, and I'm not contrasting with today. I worked there for 20 years, but I can tell you for sure, part of the culture that we like to talk about is it was an intrapreneurial culture. I had about 11 jobs in my career with the Walt Disney Company, and at least 10 of them nobody had ever had before I had them, because I made them up.
Yeah.
Honestly, I said, hey, you know what? We need to do this, and unless you were clearly nutty, the attitude then of the leadership team was like, yeah, okay, why don't you give that a try? Let's see how that works.
Right.
Don't mess up.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that had a lot to do with your experience, your background, your ability to communicate, what that business need is. But I'm so glad you brought that up, because I wanted to ask you about that, because I think it's something I mentioned yesterday too, is that I was always very interested in the fact that you both were entrepreneurs at heart. I mean, obviously you're serial entrepreneurs, always looking for ways to solve problems or to fill in gaps, whatever in the market. But you both worked at this very large corporation. But you're entrepreneurial, like you said, entrepreneurs in that organization. Again, I think that's a testament to your qualities and all that. But what do you think what can you say of the importance of having that entrepreneurial mindset, even when working for a large company?
I didn't know I had it.
Yeah.
And so I guess it goes to culture to me, right? The Walt Disney Company culture was basically a try-it culture. It was a go-for-it culture. It was I can think, if you think about it, that sense, and I guess we'll call it entrepreneuring, but that goes all the way back to Walt, right?
Yeah.
This was a guy who invented the thing, found out the thing he was passionate about, and figured out a way to maybe, because sometimes he didn't, make a living doing the thing he was passionate about, and then continuing to top himself all the time. Right? That was just the environment we lived in. We lived in it at home, right? I mean, that's the way we were sort of taught at home, right? Yeah, go for it, whether it was sports or music or whatever. And also we lived in it at work. So I guess I'm an entrepreneur. I mean, but I would have never given myself that label until I found myself owning a business one day, because it was sort of how things were.
Yeah. And so like most of my, you had, shoot, you're an Imagineer, right? And so that's a very different upbringing than an ops guy.
Right.
I was an operations guy, and still am an operations guy. And so it's a little bit more structured, I think.
Right.
But to your point, I think it's part of that culture there that, you know what operators like to do? We like to get everybody in a room and have somebody come in and go, okay, we have this problem. And we'll go, great, all right, I think I have the answer. And you sit and you sketch it out. And in 20 minutes, you're going to go.
Right.
And that's not always the best way to do things. And so I think what you might have learned on being an entrepreneur is that don't just do that knee-jerk reaction. And Disney would help you say, there's lots of people that can help you do this. And the funniest answer, I think, was, we'd always get halfway through solving whatever that problem is we put on that board, and somebody would say, "Have you asked the cast?" Oh,
yeah, of course.
Good idea. Yeah,
I'll be right back.
And that's where all the great ideas would come from, usually. We had a great quote, a friend of mine out there, Bill Thompson, and I worked closely together on all kinds of things, and our quote was, "All of my best ideas come from other people."
Yeah.
So, that's where it came
Well,
from.
look, you were part of, I mean, as you remember, when we worked together, I think it's fair to say the entire, special event resort entertainment piece was broken.
Yeah.
It was losing money, we were losing market shares. And I was telling Rick a little bit about that story of, hey, it turns out we had to pull the sales guys in. That's what you were doing. Why? Well, that's where revenue comes from. That's where opportunity comes from. We were production guys. We were making it happen, but we also had other partners. We had an creative entertainment group, and it was kind of forced patronage. We sort of had to buy our product from them, and and then there were the catering guys over here, and the decor guys over here. And it wasn't working, so we all had to get in a room and say, well, what's going on?
Yeah.
And once you get past the finger pointing stage, which didn't take too long, fortunately for us, we all said, look, we all have the same goal. How do you do this? We sort of reinvented a whole business that became profitable and became reasonable. But also, to your point about ask the cast, well, we really listened to our AV teams, and we really listened to our catering managers. We said, look, why? Well, because they're there.
They're the front
every
line,
night.
yeah.
They're there, and they can hear what the clients are saying, what the guests are saying. So if that's entrepreneuring, I guess it is. But I mean, I think there's a side of that's just kind of the natural tendency to want to keep making something better, and
it's
also different.
It's innovation, and I know you're big on that. We'll talk about that too. But yeah, it's interesting because when I was there, like you say, in the '90s, we went through so many iterations of resort entertainment production. I mean, it was REP, DEP, all the different acronyms. And
91 names.
DBP. Yeah, it was. So yeah, it's funny you say that now. It was a very entrepreneurial type of feeling, and then constantly we had the pressure, like you kind of alluded to before. That pressure from the executives to say, do we really need to own this, part of it, this department that you belong in? Do we need to own this? So, we always had that kind of inspiration as well, I think. But yeah, as far as innovation goes, I know that's something that you're focusing on now. You're calling it Zennovation.
Yeah, so I just formed a new LLC called Zennovation, and
I love that.
The name's derived from a couple of passions of mine. One, obviously, is this notion of creative innovation, because I've been really lucky in my life. That's what I've done for a living. The other side is I've been a Zen student, a practitioner of Zen in the tradition of a Zen master named Thich Nhat Hanh for 30 years. So those two things actually are force multipliers for each other, is my thesis, right? So mindfulness, paying attention, the things we practice in Zen turn out to be really, really important if you want to innovate. So the idea is I pulled those two things together, and the initial portfolio is kind of three talks. Rick really gets credit for it. We don't call them keynote speeches, we call them kitchen table talks, because that's the style, right? We want to be really clear but informal. But the idea is, what could I share at this point in my life? So I call one of them the Mouse and the Buddha, which is about the innovation, and I start with an operating definition of innovation, and basically the summary of that is it's the intersection between artistry and creativity causing a beneficial change over time, right? So you have to be clear about that. People throw these words around like innovation, and
right? It's kind of a general term.
What's it really mean? And I always tell people, I'm not asking you to accept that definition beyond the next 45 minutes, but when I'm talking, that's what I mean, right? So that's one, and I have another one about story. I've kind of had a fortunate life as a storyteller and been around great storytellers, and so I call the other one restorying, right? Which is about how do you use story to create whatever future you want. And it could be for a business, could also be for a mom, or a new college graduate. My daughter just recently finished a long travail getting through college. It's like, the world somebody coming into the job market right now faces is really different, really complicated. And the third one's about brands, another, in my view, completely abused word that people don't really understand.
It's not just a logo, right?
Yeah, it's certainly not that. So how do you wake up a lazy brand? And then the one we're excited about is the one we're here, which is we call it legendary culture.
Right.
What is that? What's that mean? Why is it important? So that's kind of the portfolio.
The three talks, and I saw the one you did on the TEDx, which was the first one you described, I think. But what is everything to me, when I hear you talk about that, everything gets tied in with storytelling, right? Storytelling is important throughout all of that. How do you think, what's the power of storytelling in whether it's rejuvenating a brand? You talk about the mom, it's like personal brand too, right? And that's one of the things I talk about with clients. Is one of the first things is, what is your origin story? Everybody loves that origin story. The Apple story, the Amazon story. People working out of their garages and starting and all that. It starts that relation that you can build with your customers. But what do you see as the power of storytelling?
Well, it's kind of everything. If you really think about it, our species takes 9 months to gestate, and then apparently, based on my experience, almost 30 years before it can leave home. We don't have claws, we don't have teeth, we don't run very fast, we don't have any body armor, but we took over a planet. How did we do that? How come this isn't three Stegosauruses sitting there, right? And I argue that the superpower we have, the thing we do as a species, is we have developed, because of this large organ, we've developed this uncanny way of going, I'm going to take something in here and get it in there. And that's our magic. That's our superpower. So when I say storytelling is everything, it's not glib. I actually really, really mean that. And I may be oversimplifying it, but I think you can reduce all human activity to the enactment of a story, and there's lots of kinds, and I talk about 6 or 7.
It's probably the oldest art form, I would think, right? Human.
It is, and I always talk about the first storyteller was, some hairy ancestor of ours who gathered everybody around the fire and went and pantomimed the bison hunt. Right?
Yeah. Right. 2 words. First word.
Right.
Sounds like
exactly. And he did that. I think it was probably a male. He did that for 2 reasons. One was, bison are heavy. I need these lazy guys to come out there with me, help me carry that thing back if I'm going to go spirit. The other reason was he noticed when he was telling stories, the ladies kind of looked at him when, so the breeding opportunity went up. So
wow.
Sure. I think that it really gets to the root of that. So you're right. You've caught me. The fundamental through line, no matter what topic I'm talking about, is the story underneath an innovation, the story underneath the brand, the story underneath who you are. That's what restorying is about. It changed the story, change the reality. And the truth is, and this was where the Zen comes in, but not to put too fine a point on it, but the thing we call reality is actually made up. We make it up. And so what is that? That's a story.
Yeah.
I always tell people I make up a story every morning before I get out of bed. It goes like this. The story goes, when I get out of bed and stand up, my feet will stick to the floor. If I didn't make that story up and believe it, I'd hold it tight onto the bed because I'd be afraid, like Calvin and Hobbes, I'd just fly off,
Kind of like the Matrix, right? It's like,
Exactly. Yeah. So, story's everything.
I always talk about the Matrix. I get frustrated because I always want to turn really fast and see if I could see a rip in the Matrix. I haven't been able to catch that yet, but and I think, correct me if I'm wrong too. I think that one of the most important stories is the story you tell yourself. I mean, you talk about when you get up in the morning. I think that a lot of us feel maybe like we're lacking something, or we're telling ourselves a certain story, but to really be to show up as the best versions of ourselves or whatever. I mean, you got to get really good at telling that story to yourself to you're going to be successful and all that. But that's cool. So let's talk about a little bit about the mouse and the Buddha. Is that actually a book now, or is that?
Well, your lips to God's ears. No, it's it's plotting.
It's a little non-committed in the description.
It's
like
plotting
this might
along.
Be a book, right?
I mean. Yeah, look, you know how this is these days. You get to our age in life and go, hey, I should write a book. Why? Well, because all the old guys write books. That's what they do. No, it's no. Look, what Rick and I've been thinking about is that it's a portfolio approach, right? So you start where you are. What we've got are some pretty compelling talks for people to get
Yeah,
them
absolutely.
going. So we've talked about other form factors, books for sure. We'd love to write one together. I might do a Mouse and the Buddha book, but actually, the book I'm really excited about working on is a book we might do together on this
Legendary culture. So
because it's full of stories. We
Yeah.
sat down yesterday for what?
Yeah.
2 hours?
3 hours,
Three,
yeah.
3 hours, and just went through notes and identified 100 stories that are, pretty unique to us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's probably the first book, and then we're going to do some other things. Maybe probably some of this podcasting, and I think there are variants on talks, like the next deepest dive is, say, a half-day workshop type environment that I call a sandbox, where you really want to get into this topic, or you want to talk about how we could apply this thinking to your specific company, or great, we'll do that. And then we've toyed around with like a day and a half, we call those camps. It's like,
a
story
retreat.
camp,
Yeah.
And that's walk away with an absolute portfolio for you, and again, that's all coming attractions, right?
Right.
We're into this 3 months.
Yeah. It's exciting. It's like the ground floor. I know it's going to be great. I can't wait for the book and everything else. So legendary culture. Let's talk about that a little bit, because obviously Disney. You touched on it already, but incredible culture. When people think of Disney, I think they think of I was asked many times the question, how does Disney get everybody, the pixie dust? How does Disney get all the cast members? And it was true. It was like, and I don't know, maybe it's changed now. You always hear things, have changed a little bit. But I remember even temporary, cast members that were there just for a couple of weeks during the holidays or whatever. They were right there on board. Everybody, you wouldn't know that they were just been there for a couple of weeks. What's the secret? How did Disney do that?
Yeah, well, I'll dive in just a little bit. I think that, of course, it starts there at least in Disney parks and resorts with traditions, orientation, and they spend a great amount of time making sure that all the incoming cast get connected to the past of the company and the history and the heritage of the company. But from an operations side, we always thought it would to accomplish what you just said. It's got to happen in the operation as well. And one of the things I think we learned quickly, at least in my experience, was, what we call leaders as teachers. And so, and goodness knows I'm not picking on my human resources friends or my facilitator friends. I was in HR for a while. I'm not saying that, but if you have someone else coming in and teach what's important in your operation, that's way different than if I'm your leader and I come in and I'm looking you in the eye and going, okay, here's the specific behaviors that we really value. You got it? And they say, yeah, I got it. I go, good. I'll see you out there tomorrow, and we'll look for that, and we'll reinforce that, and we'll help that. We used to do things called basics walks. It's about the basic activities and basic behaviors. But every new cast member that came, at least to the hotels that I were at, I would grab them all as a group, and we'd walk around the resort, and we'd tell the story. And we'd talk about how, I won't go through it all, but there's a family out in Idaho, and they're thinking about coming here. And they're having that kitchen table conversation, husband and wife, and they got their 2 kids back there. And are they going to book to be on site? Are they going to book at Disney's All-Star Resort or off-site, which is much cheaper, where the Disney resorts are much more expensive? That's quite a commitment. Yeah, you get free transportation. Yeah, I know, but, is it worth it? And they finally decide to do it. They get in the car. They're driving here, and the kids are jumping around in the back seat. P-stops all along the way, making people crazy, right? And when they get on property, they're probably lost, because Walt Disney World is a complicated place. We don't know how to get there.
Especially before GPS and Google Maps and all that.
Boy, exactly, right. So they're stressed. And so we'd open with that story. That's the guest that's coming now to see us, that's trusting us to fulfill Walt's promise, right? And they get there, and they get to that security hut, and they're nervous. Did I make the right decision? And so you go through. So security guy, here's the specific behaviors we're looking for or not looking for. Like, what we're not looking for is you to just hold up something and go, ID,
right.
driver's license. That's not what we want. What we want to say is, welcome. And he's looking in the car, and he can see there's kids in the back and suitcases. He knows they're here to check in, and so he can say, hey, you guys are here to check in today? And he goes, yep, Ron Johnson. And he goes, of course. He picks up the Johnson family. What took you guys so long? We've been expecting you, right? Now, instantly, the dad goes, they've been expecting me, right? Stress goes down. You know, he can say, we
Points
got
with the
you.
family. Yeah.
The family's excited. Now they know, oh, Dad's a big shot.
Yeah.
They were expecting him. He can say, follow that green line in the pavement. It'll take you right around to the porte-cochere at the front where the front desk is waiting for you guys. You know, have a great time. He can do all the security stuff at that same time. He's looking in the car for suspicious things. He's writing down the
Right.
license number. But none of that matters. That's how, I hope, an example of what you get to that. And by the way, as they're pulling away, he picks up the phone, he hits the front desk button and says,
Mr. Johnson's
"Hey,
coming."
Mr. Johnson's on his way."
Yeah.
Making all get that going. So to get there, it has to go from those that everybody talks about traditions, but I think it has to go much further than that and make that all happen.
You know, that's a great story. That's a story about modeling, right? I'm as someone being looked at, and you know, we had a nice, robust conversation about the word leader, and I'm really sensitive because, you know, there's lots of kinds of leaders. Situational leadership, it doesn't mean your rank, right? It
Right.
means in that moment, are you somebody commanding the eye shot of a bunch of others, right? There's a guy named Howard Gardner who was in the Johnson administration, but he wrote a really great paper once about, you know, community. What is a community? What defines it? And the thing that stuck out to me all these years is he said a community, the sense of community, and I would argue culture is the wrapper that defines the border of a community. He said community is more intimate than public and less intimate than personal, right? It's in this middle ground, right? So it implies a shared sense, an embodied shared sense. And what he said, and this is metaphoric, right, to think about a company like Disney, but I think it's apt. You know the songs, you know the dances, you know the poems, you know the story, you know where to sit around the village fire, you know who to defer to. You know, that's community. That's determined by culture. So a lot of culture comes out of language, the rest comes out of behavior. Right, so, and Rick actually told me this story, and I've known the front half of this, everybody knows, but I'd never heard the back half of this. So, you know, because you did it, right? Famously, everybody who works in a Disney park picks up trash.
Yeah.
We all pick up trash.
Yeah.
It's your job. Cleanliness
Take
is
off your sunglasses.
one of the big five,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Don't eat in front of guests.
Right.
Yeah. Don't lean against the
Exactly.
wall. Yeah.
Exactly.
I still remember all that stuff. I still do
Two more and you're done.
I still do a lot of that stuff.
See how deep that culture goes?
What are the two more?
No,
Okay.
there probably are. You can't fight, use bad language. Anyway.
Oh, can't fight. Yeah.
So what I didn't know until Rick reminded me yesterday was there's a famous story about when Disneyland opened. Walt was walking through the park on a walkthrough. You guys all know what a management walkthrough looks like. We've all been on them. And he just nonchalantly bent over and picked up some trash off the ground and threw it away. And somebody at Disneyland said, well, you know, you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
We got people to do that. Walt said, fire that guy.
Yeah.
He doesn't get it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's embodied culture. That's lived culture,
Yeah.
behaved culture, right? So,
Sure.
so then there's this magic, and I know magic's an overused word when you talk about Disney, but there's this magic that really does happen, kind of an alchemy that happens, right? So situational leaders model it, others emulate the model, then they're seen, and that cascades, and then it becomes self-corrective. To your point about, great point about casual employees, CTs, right? People coming in just to work the holidays. You know, I had that experience working in Tokyo Disneyland, like, you know, 3 months into working with our Japanese counterparts, it was extraordinarily clear to us they got us better than we got us. They were like, I'll never forget. We were hosting some of our Japanese counterparts at Disneyland in California, and we're doing walkthroughs, and some maintenance guys came by, and the radio squawked, and the Japanese
Oh, yeah, the radios,
team,
that's one too.
the Japanese
Yes.
team
Earpiece,
froze. They said, exactly. They said, no earpiece. We're like, yeah, I know. We do our best, you know. So I mean, I think when you ask about, back to your appropriate question, what when you guys say culture, what do you mean? It's all of that.
Yeah.
Right? But it is a thing that makes that village, if you will, distinctive. It's how you know you're in that village versus some other village.
Right.
And it's still today, you know, There's lots and lots of extremely well done destination entertainment venues in the world. Lots of them.
Right.
Disney has some, and there's lots of others. Still to this day, though, and I just went out to Epcot. I hadn't been out there in years, and I saw it firsthand again. It's not the rides and shows. It's not the technology. It's not the architecture. As John Hench famously once said, none of our guests leave whistling the architecture. It's what happens to that family in that car.
Yeah.
And that's what's different about the Disney cultural experience as a guest. It's critical. What do I worry about on their behalf? It's critical that that's also a distinctively different experience for the cast. And we know this service value chain, right? The way you assure a fabulous guest experience is to take care of your cast.
Right.
Because that's the product. It's not the rides. It's not the shows. Yep. It's, the cliche, right? It's the people. But it is.
Yeah.
It is. It's, we know for sure. I used to answer guest letters occasionally. I guess they would rotate that. You'd sort of get, they'd kind of say, hey, you want to answer some guest letters? And you'd get a stack. And the guests would write in saying, I'm very disappointed because I wanted to make my reservation. And I called, and they wouldn't tell me when Sheila was working at California Grill because she's our favorite waitress. Our kids love her. And we plan our trips so that we're there when she's working.
Yeah.
Right.
That's culture.
Yeah.
A $10 billion installation in the ground, and we got to make sure that
Sheila's there,
Sheila brings our sushi.
Yeah.
Game one.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I think that's the win, right? I mean, for any company, it's like if you can get to that level, and like you say, it goes back to treating your cast, your employees like you want your guests to be treated, your clients to be treated. And I think if every company just kind of even just focused on that, I mean, that's how I think the start of culture.
And that's a marvelous point, Pete, because it's all well and good to talk about Disney. Well, gee, I work in a manufacturing
how do you
company,
transfer
or gee,
that
I work
over?
for
Yeah.
telephone companies. Well, you have what I say is you have your own cultural affects, right? Let's make them not transparent, but let's make them explicit. What are they?
Yeah.
And are they serving you well? It's the same thing with innovation, by the way. People will say, well, sure, you talk about Imagineering. It's like, well, hold on a minute. You want the number one best example of live innovation in the world? Go to a mall, go to a Publix grocery store, and watch a mom with a couple of kids. That's improv theater at its best. Every moment, every day. So again, it's native, and this is a take I think we both share, which is, I'm not here to criticize anybody else's work, but we're not there to tell you how smart we are and how we do it. We're kind of there to point out and say, you got this. You may not realize it, or you may not have looked recently. You got this. We want to stimulate you to think about that and feel comfortable and empowered to go and explore this, because this is human.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's one of the things I talk to with clients about, talking about, I call it market dominating position, unique selling proposition, whatever you want to call it, is, and again, it's funny, it all starts with the story, right? It's the origin story. So how you get that, and to your point, Bob, it's like, I see two things. One, they either emphasize or make important something about their business. So like, I've been doing this for 40 years. It's like, well, okay, what does the person, the client today, really care about? Is that 40 years? Does that really mean something? Or they underestimate the importance of their story, like what they came through, what they did to to get to this point, or what they do differently than everybody else. Because very often as an operator, you get involved in your world and you don't realize you're doing it differently or innovating. So I think it's important to kind of go through that process of really understanding what that story is, because that's where it all starts. Like Rick talking about traditions. I love traditions. A 2-day Disney thing where I always remember the story about the buses. You'll never see exhaust from the buses because they and it was, so to me again it's all story, right? Everything that you're talking about, it all starts with that story. I mean, that's how you build culture, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like, if you have that strong story, you get people to buy into that, with their heart and soul.
It's fascinating. Right? So I'll tell you a quick tradition story. It's one of our favorite stories about our dad. So, back earlier in the company, my dad's office was in what we called the center building, which the guy, by the way, who invented the real center building, which was at Disneyland, it was called the Center Building because it was in the center of the park. His name was Van France. The founder of the Disney University. Van used to come in and say, "Can't believe you call that the Center Building. It's like on the edge of town. You can't even find it, right?" But Dad's office was in the Center Building, and he came out, and it shared space with the Disney University, and it was evening. And he came out, and there was a man standing there, and he was obviously in custodial whites, so he was clearly a custodial host. And he had his family with him, his wife and his kids with him. And I don't know if you remember, but in those days they had the hallways had framed photographs and art of great moments in Disney history, and but some of them were the step of the steps in animation. So there was a framed blue line sketch, and then a flamed inked in drawing, and then finally a painted cell. And Dad came home, and this was early, and he came home tired, but he said, I think we're going to make it. I think this is going to work. I said, what happened? He said, walked out of my office. I walked out in the hallway, and there was this guy wearing custodial whites with his family, pointing at the cells on the wall and explaining to his children what it was like to be in the entertainment business.
Oh.
The guy's a Pam and Broom guy.
Yeah.
He said, if we can get there, we're going to be fine.
He gets it, yeah.
And that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
I remember he said something like, "Here's the first step in the process for our movie, Snow White."
Our first step from when we made Snow White.
Snow White, which was just incredible.
Yeah,
when you say,
awesome.
"How does it make that?" You got it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we touched on it a little bit, but how do you take that and translate it into another industry? Is there, again, does it start with a story?
Well, it can. I think it starts with a premise, which is, okay, you have a culture, and that culture does rest on a body of stories. You may not know them.
Right.
Be tacit.
Yeah, because every company has a culture, right? Whether it's developed or not, whether it's good or bad.
Whether it's intentional or not.
Right.
The question is intentionality, right? So are you just living in it and it's a miasma and it's just around you and so you don't notice it? So one of the first ways you can do it is, here's some tips and tricks to call attention to it. Go and ask some questions. Go walk around. Go take a look. What do you think your story is?
Right.
Make a few up and try them out. To Rick's point, let me just, if I said we are blah, blah, and blah, or this, that, and that, does that sound right to you?
Right.
And so I think it goes there. Once you kind of get that door open, there are fundamentals of storytelling. We talk about the 6 elements of story and how that we can get into all that, and we do, but that's the entry strategy. Is, have you ever examined your story? One of diversity and inclusion is a big topic these days, and we have another colleague we're working with, a guy named Chris Trout, who's developing some pretty interesting thoughts around this. But I was in a session once, and it was a diversity training session, and people in the room were of varying backgrounds, varying ethnicities, varying cultures. And it was time to share your story. Oh, well, how about your story? Well, how about your story? Well, one of the, I'm just going to say it bluntly, one of the white guys in the room kind of looked up, and he wasn't being snarky, but he was honest. He said, well, I don't really have a story. And 5 other people said, that's the problem. You think your story is so transparent that you think everybody shares it.
Right.
It's not.
Right.
It's like, it was like a bullet, right? It's like, that's true for everybody.
Yeah.
And that's true for, by the way, there's shared stories and there's personal stories too. By the way, your story and your story and your story, you don't have one. You have a portfolio. There is his story as a brother.
Right.
There's my story as a dad. That's different than my story as a business leader, or different from my story as a writer, right? So all of those are there. So we like to get people to think about, which story are you enacting? And by the way, you don't have to pick one, but you have to be intentional.
Yeah, I love that intentional take on it as far as the culture. Because like I say, every company has a culture, but to get, and I think a lot of companies would even say, hey, we have a very strong culture. We have to have these people fit into the culture. And it's like, but it's not defined, so it's really hard to do. Because I think one of the hardest things to copy, one of the hardest things to maintain is a culture, I think, in an organization. And I think where it starts is being able to hire it correctly. And I think that's what Disney did a great job at as well, is hiring the right people. And I think that in order to do that, you have to have some kind of definition and intentionality on your culture to see if this person really would fit in, because I think that's best for everybody. Yeah. So unfortunately, we have to wrap up here. But I have to ask you one question. This is something I've always heard this story about the the statue with Walt and Mickey at the main gate, and the whole two-finger point for Disney cast members.
Yeah.
You guys know if that story is really because Walt was holding a cigarette in his hand?
Oh,
Two fingers. Have you heard that?
I don't know that.
I've never
heard that story.
But you know what? Probably.
Yeah.
The thing about
And he had a mustache.
the thing about Walt's stories, we laugh about this, is most of the quotes you hear from Walt, he never said. About 80% of them were written
He's like
by
Confucius.
No, they were written by Marty Sklar, because that was Marty's job. Marty's first job was as a publicist. And the ones that weren't written by Marty were written by Van. Walt said about 5 things. Now, that said, most of the Walt quotes you hear, he would have said.
Right.
He just didn't.
Yeah. Well, that's even interesting in itself that he had such the personality that you can say, yeah, that Walt would have said that.
Next time, and I hope you'll have us back to talk more.
Absolutely.
Next time we'll talk about what's a myth, because it's a word that gets beat up in our culture. I mean, it's coefficient with lie, and that's not what the word myth means.
Right.
A myth from the Greek is a story that explains how the universe works. Right. Walt had a mythic tale. There was a mythic Walt Disney, completely different from the guy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I imagine, I don't know, I never asked him, but I imagine he had a little tussle sometimes. It's going, wait, which one am I right now?
Yeah.
But that's what fits too. I'm sorry, but that's what fits with, like you said, well, you had a mustache, and that was back then against the grooming guidelines.
Right.
But that was the myth. He was playing a character when he was walking around Disneyland. He wasn't. His cast member role was being Walt Disney, which had a mustache.
He was just like a character on set, right?
Yeah.
I'll tell you one last story if we have time, quickly on Walt. So it's pretty well known, but he was walking around Disneyland. A little girl comes up and says, "Oh, are you Walt Disney?" He said, "Yeah, I am, sweetheart." "Well, so you draw Mickey Mouse?" And he said, "Well, no, not exactly. I used to."
Right.
"Oh, what? But you're the voice for Mickey Mouse, And he said, "Well, no, not really." And so this little girl puts her little hands on her hips and says, "Mr. Disney, exactly what is it that you do?" And his famous answer, you want to say, you probably remember, his famous answer, "Well, I'm kind of like a little bee. I just buzz around from flower to flower and make sure everything's pollinated."
Right.
But I mean, that's the way that works. Again, in that culture, was Walt that? Yep, he was also terrifying.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And also complicated. And
Right.
by the way, speaking of leaders, I mean, our boss, right, our longtime boss, Dick Nunes, who just passed away, Dick had this persona.
Green side up.
General Patton. Green side up.
I love it.
But he had a General Patton, kind of a butt kicker thing. That was one piece of the myth. There were way more. There was way more there than that.
He was really kind of a softie though too, wasn't he? I mean, I saw him get emotional. I think like when
he had quite a lot of emotional potential.
Yeah.
And he, above all, was devoted to the brand and the product.
Yes, he was.
And above all of that, the cast.
Yep.
I mean, so the idea is leadership in cultures is important, but it's complicated. So again, I'll go back to, you got to be aware of it. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from a guy I worked for who I didn't like, who didn't like me, but he gave some good advice. And one was, look, when you step out of your office, there's 100 pairs of eyes on you. I don't care how bad your day's going or what's on your mind. You need to look up. You need to engage. You need to make eye contact. Those people are looking at you and they're forming an opinion about how the rest of their day is going to go based on you walking down the hall.
Yeah, you're on stage.
So absolutely,
On stage.
So important note.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about that because Tony and I talked about this the last time. Tony, our producer here, talked about this whole persona thing about like you put on. It's almost like you put on a mask and you go out and you play this role, like you're saying, like like with Walt doing, and it's just interesting the whole balance between that and authenticity, right? Like you gotta, obviously you're bringing most of yourself to that role, but there's a certain percentage that needs to kind of adjust for being on stage.
So it's an old storyteller trope, but don't conflate authenticity and truth. Snow White is an absolutely authentic tale on every level. It operates intrinsically and extrinsically, and it's an authentic experience. It is, of course, entirely made up. Right? It's fictional, right?
But it's authentic.
Great, there's an old stump storyteller. A stump storyteller is a performance artist who stands up and tells a story. There's an old tale from the Storytelling Center up in Tennessee, which storyteller axiom is all stories are true as long as the telling lasts.
All right.
You know.
Love it.
Awesome. Well, at that, we'll leave it at that. And guys, so how can people find you? When should they call you?
Right away. Call us. In fact, the phone
Immediately.
lines are open. Please call now. Easiest way is email. Mine is simple. It's BALLEN, Allen at ideasorlando.com. That will get to me. You want to?
And yeah, for me, it's pretty simple too. RickAllen1 at mac.com. So RickAllen, the number 1 at mac.com.
And Pete didn't ask us what we thought the most important things to do in a meeting were.
No, yeah.
We should tell him. So we figured it out.
Okay.
You're going to want this.
Yeah,
It's
definitely
important.
want
Write
this.
down.
Yeah, right. Everybody.
Well, I
write
like
this down.
agendas, number 1.
Three,
I think that's
three
great.
agendas are good.
Agendas.
Agendas, right? Are good. Really excellent snacks. Excellent
Gotta
snacks.
have good snacks.
Very
Snacks.
critical.
Yeah.
And hiring us.
All right.
Those are the 3 most important
Absolutely.
things.
And I might add like scotch or bourbon or something.
Oh, well, number 4.
Yeah.
A morning meeting.
But I like but I like the rule of 3 though, so we'll keep it there. But again, Rick, Bob, Alan, thank you. This has been a pleasure. I love hearing you guys talk about the stories about storytelling in general, and I can't wait to see what you do with Zennovation, and I can't wait to have you back again. So thanks for your time.
Please ask us. We'll come.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us here.
Yep, absolutely. And also thank you to Josh Pies at C47 Films and C47 Digital Studios. Please check out Josh's podcast as well. It's called Bootstrapped Unicorns. I think you can find it on YouTube, Tony. YouTube. Thank you to our engineer, Tony Golden. He's incredible in here, our engineer and producer. And of course, thank you to our listeners and viewers. I hope you enjoyed Meeting Success. This is Coach Pete saying bye for now.